60. The ship on fire. Hark! Hark! What was that? Hark to the shout! Fire! Fire! Then a tramp, and a rush, and a rout! Fire! Fire! It is raging above and below. The smoke and hot cinders all blindingly blow. The cheek of the sailor grows pale at the sight, and his eyes glisten wild in the glare of the light. The flames in thick wreaths mount higher and higher. O God, it is fearful to perish by fire. The Ship on Fire, Charles Mackay. We sped rapidly through Cook's Strait into the sea and had advanced about 200 miles when John, who was stationed in the dome, suddenly called out, "Big light ahead!" We rushed to the dome. About 10 miles to northwest was a great flaming light, now shooting up in lofty spires, then sinking down, partially obscured by smoke. "'Tis a ship on fire," said I. "Haste to the rescue of passengers and crew." We flew swiftly onward and soon reached the burning ship. She was a 3-mast vessel, about 2,000 tons burden, all on fire, deck, masts, sails, rigging. The scene was appalling. Hanging to the deck railing, chain whales, foot ropes, and anchor chains were crowds of people shrieking in agony as, scorched by the flames, they let go their hold and fell one by one into the sea. The bowsprit and jibboom were thronged with others clinging to the forestays and martingales. Scattered over the waters were numbers clinging to spars, planks, boxes, and bales of goods. Several boats, crowded with passengers and many clinging to the gunwales, were tossing in the waves. Many of them, having no steersman, ran foul of each other or falling into the trough of the sea, capsized, and the wretched inmates were thrown pell-mell into the water and drowned. The smoke from the burning ship settled around, almost concealing the frightful scene. "Her passengers are Chinese coolies, or the lower classes of laborers on passage to Australia or West Indies," said I. "The ship has evidently been driven by stress of weather out of her course. I don't discover her captain and officers. Our ship cannot hold 1/10 of the poor creatures, but we must save all we can." The ship was lowered to within a few feet of the water. Rope ladders were thrown out. The lifeboat was got out, manned by Hartillion and some of the crew. We coursed to and fro among them, shouting and blowing the whistle, but the poor drowning wretches, as they caught glimpses of our ship sailing over their heads amidst the smoke, and Hartillion towering in the lifeboat, and heard our shouts and loud whistles, seemed frenzied with terror, refusing help. Some in the boats fired their revolvers or struck at us with oars and axes, as we were compelled to sheer off for safety and drew in the lifeboat. "They are ignorant and superstitious," said I. "We can do nothing to save them, and must leave them to their fate." All at once loud yells were heard some distance off, and hurrying to the spot we witnessed a sight that made our blood run cold. A large raft, constructed with spars, planks, and fastened together with crosspieces and ropes, was tossing on the waves. It was so thickly crowded with coolies it had sunk almost knee-deep below the surface, and scores of other half immersed in the water were clinging desperately to the timbers. Our ship advanced slowly and hung about 100 feet above the raft. The smoke from the burning ship concealed it from the view of the people beneath. A perfect pandemonium of blood and murder, amidst the yells, shrieks, and curses, raved like a hell on board the raft. The coolies were massacring the miserable wretches of their own race who clung to the timbers, and also fighting amongst themselves, plunging their long knives into each other, the stronger killing the weaker, and flinging the dead bodies overboard by the score. The raft, being lightened, rose higher out of the water. On one side of the raft were clustered the captain of the ship and a few of his crew, making a desperate defense against the coolies who, brandishing their knives, charged upon them with loud yells. Fortunately, the crew were armed with revolvers, cutlasses, and axes. The captain, a tall, athletic young man, was armed with a cutlass and half-dozen revolvers in his belt. As fast as the coolies charged, they were shot, brained, or slashed, and their dead bodies lay in heaps, forming almost a rampart in front of the captain and sailors. "Oh, horrible, horrible!" exclaimed Altafora. "Is it possible that a common danger involving all should arouse such murderous instincts?" At this moment the flames of the burning ship flared up, shedding a bright light over the faces of the captain and sailors, hitherto concealed by the smoke. "Great God!" I exclaimed. "They are of my race! White men! Quick, quick! Lower the ship!" The coolies paused in their bloodthirsty work, drew back, dragging out the dead bodies of their companions which had obstructed their onset, and flinging them overboard, then rushed forward with loud yells amidst the explosion of pistols and clash of cutlasses, and the shriek of a woman rent the air. "Oh, haste, haste!" exclaimed Altiphora and Asterion. Again the coolies were driven back, and we saw the prostrate form of a young woman, her fair hair streaming over the timbers of the raft, clasping a young babe to her breast. Close by her side knelt the captain, who had sunk wounded to his knee, holding aloft his bloody, dripping cutlass and pointing his last revolver at the coolies. The sailors were already dead. "Fling out the rope ladder," shouted Hartilion. "I'll scatter that murderous gang like chaff." Down rushed the ship. The ladder was thrown out. Hartilion and I, grasping our cutlasses in our teeth, leaped over the railing, followed by Altiphora and John, and sprang down the ladder to the raft. "Hullo, you bloody devils!" shouted Hartilion in the voice of thunder. "Fall back!" The coolies heard that terrible voice and looked around. As they saw this tremendous giant towering in their midst and the great airship hanging over their heads, they were frenzied with terror and rushed with loud cries to the further extremity of the raft, some leaping overboard. Hartilion pursued them like an incarnate spirit of vengeance, hewing off their heads, lopping off their arms and legs, shearing them from shoulder to hip with blows of his terrible cutlass, and in less than 3 minutes not a single coolie was left alive. The surrounding waters were strewn with dismembered bodies and dyed with blood. In the meantime I raised the head of the dying captain on my knee, staunched his bleeding wounds, and administered a powerful stimulant. A few moments later he revived and looked wonderingly around. "I'm an American," he feebly murmured. "My name is William Allen. My ship, the Plymouth. My wife, Mary Ann. Where—" Hartilion laid her insensible form by his side. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. Altiphora took the babe and laid its little face close to his. His eyes brightened, and he kissed its forehead and cheeks, then faintly murmured, "Mary Ann, darling, our dear little one, farewell." Then raising his rapidly glazing eyes upward, "Oh, God, I commit them to thy care." His lips blanched. The blood gushed from his wounds. He gave a few short gasps and expired, still clasping the hand of his unconscious wife in his own. The gathering surges rolled over the raft, which, released from its human freight, tossed on the waters, warning us to depart. Hartilion raised the dying mother gently in his arms. She also had been stabbed by the knives of the coolies. Altiphora took the babe. We ascended to the ship and laid her on the couch. She was a beautiful form, lovely countenance, and apparently about 18 years of age. "How beautiful she is! So young to die! Oh, Frederick, doctor, save her life for God's sake, and her dear child's!" exclaimed Altiphora with streaming eyes. We bound up her wounds and administered a strong stimulant, but it was too late. Her lifeblood had almost drained away. She opened her eyes, saw her little babe smiling by her side, and with a cry of pleasure feebly raised it in her arms and clasped it to her breast. "Oh, my darling little one," she murmured, pressing its lips, and in the last lingering kiss her soul took its flight. We knelt around the couch where smiling infancy of dawn of life lay side by side with youth and beauty, wrapped in the cold embrace of death. Around her neck was clasped a locket containing a miniature photograph of herself and her husband, with a lock of dark and golden hair entwined in a true lover's knot. Also a little cross with the engraved motto, "Christus mea spies," Christ my hope. On her finger was a plain gold ring engraved, "William to Mary Ann, Semper Fidelis." We cruised around in all directions, the light of the burning ship illuminating the sea to a great distance, scanning the waters and blowing the whistle in hopes that we might discover some of the lost, but not a single boat or human form was seen. The fire by this time had reached the vessel's hold, where evidently gunpowder and spirits were stored in her cargo. A column of flame shot high in the air. There was a terrible explosion. The ship was blown to pieces, and the fragments scattered over the deep. Of that good ship, thronged with its human freight, treading the decks with strong and vigorous life, all were sunk beneath the waves, and naught was left but the helpless little babe, quietly sleeping in the arms of its lifeless mother. We decided to hasten our journey to Australia and directed our course to the west. We had noticed for some time that the powerful aerial batteries were unable to elevate the ship over 5,000 feet in the air. Asterion and Thalic, after a thorough examination, announced that the electric currents traversing the Earth's crust were not near as so strong as those on Mars, although our planet is more than 6 times its bulk and weight. They also found that the currents diminished in intensity from the poles towards the equator, whereas on Mars they are of uniform strength all over the planet. Thalic decided that the cause of this difference was in the Martian metals, of which the batteries were made, but whatever it was, the unfortunate result that followed could not have been foreseen nor averted. We directed our course to Sydney, lying on the east shore of New South Wales in Botany Bay. In former years, this was the old penal colony of Great Britain, but is now really a charming city with a fine harbour and surrounding country. The wind, which has been steadily increasing, began to blow a gale, and the storm wings were got out. We had advanced about 200 miles when a violent storm arose from the southwest against which it had been impossible to make headway, and the captain gave orders to elevate the ship above the storm belt. The aerovolt batteries were put to their fullest tension, but could not raise the ship to the necessary height. We were immersed in the storm clouds, and lightning flew around us in all directions. "Captain," said Asterion, "we are not safe here. The magnetic metals of our ship cannot throw off these terrestrial thunderbolts as they can our Martian flashes. You had better descend to the sea." Suddenly there was a tremendous thunder peal, and a long, zigzagging lightning flash struck the bow, broke off one wing, dashed into the machine room, knocking down the 3 engineers and steersman. The ship reeled, almost capsized, and whirled to and fro like a leaf in the wind. "Check off batteries, furl wings, get out propellers, and descend to the sea," shouted Captain Susanak as he sprang to the wheel. The orders were quickly obeyed. The ship righted, swiftly descended to the sea, and sank beneath the waves into the region of aqueous calm. We attended to the prostrate men. Fortunately, they were not injured, but severely stunned. The cabin lights, bow, and stern electric reflectors were lit. We were 50 feet below the surface. The propellers drove the ship ahead, and as she rushed through the waters, the sound was like the roaring of the rapids of Niagara. The valves of the air generators were opened, letting fresh supplies of air into the cabin. "How fast are we going?" asked Altiphora. 40 miles per hour, replied the captain, consulting his velocimeter. We will continue our submarine journey till the storm blows over, and then rise to the surface and resume the aerial," said Asterion. "I rather prefer this mode of travel," said Altiphora. "'Tis a pleasant variety, and appears to be safer than by air in these terrestrial storms." "Provided we do not run against something in the way," said I. Suddenly there was a severe shock, and the ship came to a dead halt as if she had run onto a sandbar. Hartilion sprang to the dome. "By the great Tramigolia and all the big fish of our sea," he shouted with a roar of laughter, "our ship has run her nose smack into the jaws of a whale." It was true. An enormous finback, over 100 feet long, attracted by the headlight, and taking it for some new and appetizing morsel, had, with his usual voracity, opened his huge jaws and rushed forward to swallow it. The sharp prow entered his maw, splitting him up in half the length of his body, and he hung with his lacerated jaws clasped around the bow, feebly fluttering his tail. The propellers were reversed, but it was impossible to extricate the ship from the huge, writhing mass that clung to her. "Well, Captain," laughed Altiphora, "as the whale has got us halfway down, it would look as if he would soon make a dinner of us." "Give him a little edemic from the stomach pump," suggested Hartilion. "I'll reckon he'll vomit us up like the whale did Jonah, as John has told us all about." "All right, I'll administer a dose which I fancy will stir his whale ship up rather lively," said Captain Susanak. Then to one of the gunners, "Fire into him with the bow guns." The gun was thrust from its port into the prow, which was buried in the whale's belly, and fired. There was a dull explosion. The monster was blown to atoms, and the surrounding waters were dyed with blood. Freed from its encumbrance, the ship sped onward for an hour longer, when suddenly a loud crash was heard at the stern. A half-sunken mast of a wrecked ship had become entangled in one of the propellers and broke it from the shaft. As It was impossible to continue our course. The captain gave orders to ascend. The prow was directed upwards, and had scarce risen above the water when Hartillion, stationed at the dome, shouted, "Back! Back! Iceberg right ahead!" The propeller was reversed, but too late. The berg was close on us. Its lofty wall towered over the ship, and a long, sharp ice spar, projecting from the low platform at its base, struck below the waterline, crushing a great hole in her prow and driving her back. The water rushed into the cabin. In 20 minutes she would have sunk with all on board. Everything was in confusion. Hartillion sprang up the ladder, tore open the hatchway, and leaped from the deck on the platform of the berg, where the ship lay helpless. He braced his colossal limbs like pillars of iron against the berg, stooped his mighty shoulders under the prow, and heaving the ship up with the strength of 10 Hercules, swayed and shook her to and fro, tore her loose from the ice spur, and flung her off, then leaped into the billows, seized a rope, and climbed to the deck, just as the almost doomed ship rose trembling from the waters, with the water pouring in torrents from the hole. "Brave, brave Hartillion!" exclaimed Altiphora and Asterion, clasping him in their arms. "You have saved our lives!" As the young and handsome giant smilingly received the heartfelt thanks and applause of all on board, he looked the very Grecian hero himself, just released from sustaining the burden of Atlas on his shoulders. "Really, Lieutenant," said Captain Fulminax, do you terrestrians let your wretched ships and icebergs float promiscuously around your oceans to endanger the safety of vessels in this manner? Such culpable carelessness would never be permitted on our planet." "If we should undertake to destroy the icebergs that infest our polar seas," I replied, "the whole combined navies of our world could not accomplish a 10,000th part of it. If we had our little ice fleet down here, we could clear all your oceans of them in a single summer." The ship was hovering above the waves, 2 storm wings only halfway out of their ports to steady her. Being on the lee side of the berg, she was partly screened from the storm. The berg was enormous, full 500 feet high and half a mile long, and the waves dashing high up against the upright walls with thundering sound. In the meantime, the crew were hard at work trying to close the hole in the prow with doubling folds of strong canvases wrapping around the outside with cords, and also trying to rig up a new wing, an extra propeller, but the work was difficult and dangerous from the continuous pitching and rolling of the ship and the fierce gusts of wind that swept around the berg. We hoped, when repairs were completed, to descend to the water and weather it out till the storm blew over. The heavy clouds in the west now broke away, leaving a clear opening in the sky, through which the bright moon shone over the storm-lashed ocean. John, who was stationed in the dome, suddenly shouted, "There's a ship! A ship!" We rushed to the dome and looked out. About 6 miles to the northwest was a 3-masted vessel, scudding before the wind under closed reef topsails. I examined her with a glass. "She is an American," said I. "I know by the cut of her hull and the style of her trimmings." "Suppose we fire off the alarm gun," said Altiphora, "and make a dash for her. When we get near enough, throw out our grapnel ropes, and the crew will haul us aboard and take us to some near port where we can lay to and repair a ship. We'll pay them well in Martian gold." "Excellent," replied Asterion, "but I fancy terrestrial sailors are not familiar with Martian airships. They would probably be frightened out of their wits, refuse to take us aboard, or perhaps fire upon us." "On the contrary," I replied, "our genuine American tars are the bravest in the world. They would hob a nob with Old Nick himself and dance a hornpipe with his imps. They are also the most generous and noble men you'll find afloat. When we get near enough, I'll hail them. They'll take us aboard at once. As for airships, plenty of Yankee inventors are exhibiting flying models of them everywhere, and they'll think ours is a perfected thing. I'll tell them that we're taking a trip around the world, represent you Martians as natives of the Fiji Islands, quite civilized, and Hartillion is a small boy from the mountains of the moon, all expressly imported for the zoo gardens in Washington. They'll take it as a matter of course and give us a hearty greetings and hospitalities." These suggestions received the unanimous approval of all on board. "Load up the alarm guns, get grapnel ropes ready, and steer for the vessel," ordered Captain Susenak. The gun was loaded. The ropes with their Their three-pronged steel anchors to catch into the rigging of the vessel were secured to the deck railing. The ship veered about, ready to dash out. Suddenly the bell of the telegraph sounded. The operator stationed at the instrument shouted, "Dispatch for Mars!" We rushed to the cabin. On the dial of the telegraph was flashed out in letters of fire, shot 120 million miles from Mars in less than a second.